The Sports Project.
We got to talk some Michigan because Steve had a note in there talking about kind of the drama that's ensued, but now we had one big piece of information that I looked at this. I don't know how you felt, Dan, but I looked at this and said, this is about the least dramatic hire when we're talking about the drama and we're talking about the history and how messy it got, not only with the recent stuff, but there's been other allegations, it seems like every time we talk to somebody from University of Michigan, whether it's Anthony Broom or Clayton Safey, they talk about how it's always allegations, it's always suspensions and different things. Now we've got a guy that really has a history of a pretty clean program in Kyle Whittingham, who left his program in Utah, but now has kind of a soft landing here in Michigan.
Yeah, I think he's exactly what they need. After the last 5 years, it's something new every year. He's never had an issue with any of this. I mean, it's going to be new to have the transfer portal and everything on this level because Michigan is a step up as far as resources and what they can get. But he's the adult in the room, is what I think they kind of need. I think Biff Poggi was trying to be that. I think he actually is. So hopefully they turn it around for, at least not being in the headlines for the wrong reasons.
And like you said, I think the Biff Poggi point is a good one because it's going to be interesting to see what Michigan does as far as moving on from this era, because although not all these people would have been complicit in the different things that happened, there were a lot of things that happened over this past few years here. And so then you've got to figure out who needs to be moved out of the program and who needs to be moved in. And Whittingham's got a lot of resources. They're already talking about his offensive coordinator coming over from Utah, because I think that was one of his better ones statistically in the whole time he was at Utah. And then they're even talking about the quarterback. I don't know how that would work. That would mean probably Underwood would be gone under that circumstance, which you want to try to hang on to him.
Yeah, I don't know what the roster is going to be like, because I know January 2nd is, even though it feels like it's next year, it is just around the corner for when everybody can enter. I don't think they move on from Underwood with the amount of money they paid him. But, I mean, competition at quarterback couldn't hurt. I guess he probably had the shackles on him this year, but he didn't look overwhelmingly like the best quarterback in the country.
He looked like a freshman at times. I think he did look like a guy that could carry this program going forward. But I don't know. The thing with NIL is they paid him a lot of money. So I agree with you. I think Michigan will want to keep him. But does that mean he wants to stay? Because it's not exactly it's not the same as like an NFL contract. That's one of the weird things about NIL is I know that was a discussion. I think Troy Aikman came out and said that about he had done NIL once and he had given a large amount of money to a quarterback at UCLA, which I think we later realized was Dante Moore.
I was just saying Dante Moore, yeah, from Detroit.
And now he's at Oregon and scheduled to be a top 5 pick maybe in the NFL draft by projections here. And he left UCLA, and I think Aikman, the way he was describing it, is it's just like, well, that money's gone.
Yeah, he just threw it in that hole and can't get it back. Because, I mean, he said what? There was no thank you note, no nothing. It was just, I stepped up, and what'd I get for it?
Yeah, you got 1 year at the program, then he left, and then now he's presumably being paid by Oregon too. I mean, it is kind of the Wild West. I want to cover this more on my show, and Steve does a good job talking to Tim Selgo and other folks on this show about the whole NIL thing, but it is just like the Wild West now. There's just not a lot of regulation to anything going on in college football.
Yeah, it's kind of unbelievable, and that's why I was kind of like, I know Whittingham had alluded to it. He was like, now it's just collect as much talent as you can and hope it gels, because what else is there? I mean, a scholarship means nothing, and like it can go any way you want it to.
Well, not to bring my Hoosier-ness into this, but I do think of Curt Cignetti and the fact that he moved over from James Madison, and he was able to have some continuity by bringing a lot of his players, even though they wouldn't be viewed as Big Ten level players. You could see the difference in the size, especially that first year, last year, of the players he was bringing in. But if Whittingham is able to bring some players over from Utah, that might be his continuity too, and then layer in some guys from other programs that work.
Some guys might stick around. Actually, I wanted to bring up your program because I thought the age thing with Whittingham, he's 67. Actually, did you see Connor Stalions tweet about this?
No, I don't think so.
He's like, well, let's check notes. He's only 18 months older than Curt Cignetti, and nobody's given Cignetti issues for his age other than they don't think he'll leave because of his age. So I think he's okay.
That's a great point, and that's exactly what I thought of. I didn't think of, and maybe it's because Cignetti's at my program, but that was a plus in this process with Cignetti. That was one of the reasons that contributed to him staying. I don't think he stays at Indiana if he's in his early 40s. I think he maybe tries to move on, but he's made them into a powerhouse. It was his first Power 5 big conference job, and he was able to cement himself quickly. Whittingham, a little different. He has more of a resume, but yeah, he's not going to want to go anywhere, which is a good thing. You can ensure a good transition to the next guy, which I think is what they're looking at, where Whittingham stabilizes the program, and then you can pick a younger guy, an heir apparent to
maybe
him.
This offensive coordinator is that head coach in waiting, and they did it a few times. I know Jimbo Fisher was that at one time, and I think Florida had that defensive coordinator who just came back, Will Muschamp. I think he was a coach in waiting at one time. It happens. I don't know how that it always works out very well, but...
No, but you would think that Michigan would kind of want to do that. Granted, Jerome Moore was kind of in that same category, I guess, but that there's a lot of circumstances with that. But yeah, interesting stuff with Michigan. We'll have to talk about them more, but we'll switch to a different Michigan football program here. We'll talk to Adam Jaksa of the Central Michigan football here and talk about their bowl game and their season as a whole once we light up the Jeff Blonick guest line. So stick with us. You're listening to The Sports Project on Jethro FM. So you've got Ryan Walsh in here as the guest host with substitute teacher vibes. And I'm excited to talk to this next guest. I know he's familiar with the show here, and he's been on the show a couple times with Steve Project, but I'm familiar with him through his work announcing at a Tigers game, so I want to talk to him about that. But he's also the voice of CMU football. They had a good year this year, and this is Adam Jaksa, and welcome to the show, Adam.
Hey, Ryan, how you doing? Happy holidays and Merry Christmas, man.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you. Happy holidays to you. You've been busy here. Have you gotten much of a break for the holidays?
Today's the first break. Yeah, we went to Northern Illinois for basketball last Saturday, and then Wisconsin on Monday, and then directly to Detroit to cover the bowl trip, and then obviously played yesterday in a game that I will forget as quick as everybody else, hopefully, and here we are.
Well, I appreciate you talking to us during your break. It's not much of a break if you talk to us, I guess, but we'll try to keep it fun here for you, because that's one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, actually, because we won't belabor the bowl game. I know it didn't go according to plan. I watched it. The game script just didn't play out in Central's favor. It's a heavy running team. They had the early turnovers, and it just seemed like it was hard to come back after that. But that doesn't undermine the fact that it was still a good season for Central Michigan football here.
Yeah, it was. It's tough that that's your lasting memory of this season. You have to wait. We always talk about it, me and my color commentator, Brock Gutierrez, you wait so long for the football season, and then it gets here, and then it just flies by. But to think that the biggest reason that they had this turnaround was the fact that they did not turn it over this year. I mean, they forced 21 turnovers at the end of the day, and they had 12 total turnovers heading into yesterday. And they had 3 snaps in a row where they turned the football over in Northwestern. Give them a ton of credit. I mean, they recovered every opportunity. They got a pick. They caught a couple of fumbles, and they turned those all into touchdowns. And in a game where, yeah, I know, I think there were some jokes online because it was 0-0 after the first quarter, but that's kind of what that game was going to be. 2 offenses that kind of sputter, good defenses, field position, time of possession, and it felt like it was going to be a close, low-scoring game, and turnovers were going to be a key. And that's something that Northwestern had done a lot this year, and something that Central Michigan had not done a lot. So you felt like CMU had a chance to stay in the game and maybe have a chance, and then 4 turnovers later, 4 touchdowns off those turnovers later, it didn't go their way. So, I mean, hey, Northwestern's run 6 bowl games in a row, and David Braun's done an incredible job, and obviously Matt Drinkle and the staff, what a great job that they did this year, coming off 3 straight losing seasons. They take over about, I think, 80 to 85% of the roster came back. So the guys that experienced all of those losing seasons, and they turn it around, they're in the hunt to try and go to the MAC championship game, up to the final game of the regular season, get to a bowl game for the first time in 4 years. I mean, there's a lot of good here. It's just a stinger to end the season yesterday.
I think that's the positive that the fans have to keep in mind, though. Like you said, this program is trending up. They did a great job with the first year here and getting into a bowl game and having a very positive season. They retained a lot of the players. That says something right there. I think that should help recruiting going forward. And, I mean, we've got to give Northwestern their flowers a little bit, too. They're a good team. That's not that the narrative on the national broadcast that I was watching, they basically talked about, hey, our whole thing at Northwestern is we probably should have won more games here, and so that would have elevated them to a better bowl game. And the Big Ten was strong this year, so they got a little beat up in the Big Ten like a lot of teams did. There's a lot of strong teams there. We're seeing that in the college football playoff. So it didn't play out the way that Central Michigan wanted, but still it was a tough team and hopefully a good stepping stone to next year here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is everything that you wanted coming into this first year. You know, it'd been really unfortunate how the program had slid the last few years. You're not, Central Michigan football is a very prestigious program within the Mid-American Conference, and even outside of it, it's got a lot of respect for how many guys they've sent to the National Football League, how many big games and upset wins they've had over Big Ten or Big 12 or whatever Power 4 conference opponents. And it didn't happen yesterday, but this season to get back. Again, Matt Drinkle was hired a year ago. That was December. He took over. He brought in a brand new staff, young, hungry, energized, flipped the program with a lot of the same guys, got excitement around Mount Pleasant with the alums and donors and people that kind of had been quiet and kind of like, the last few years. Like he had to bring that energy back, and that's part of the reason why you go get a new head coach, and he did all of those things. And you can sense the sincerity behind what he's doing. There's a lot of coaches that today will say things, and I don't know if they actually mean them. That's not the vibe from Coach Drinkle. Like, he is as authentic as they come, and they had a heck of a season. They had a couple opportunities where if they win a couple of tight games, it maybe goes a little bit better. But I think they are. This is what made yesterday so cool. Is like those two programs are very similar. Northwestern is not the most talented team in the Big Ten, but they play so hard under David Braun. And it's just like, yeah, that's kind of what football is supposed to be about. Central Michigan, not the most talented roster yet in year one of Matt Drinkle in the Mid-American Conference, but they played really hard, and they found a way to win some games that people didn't think they would get. And here's the other thing. How many bowl games this year are you going to see where both teams don't have any opt-outs for draft, for transfer portal? There was none yesterday in that game. And that's like, yes, I know maybe the bowl games are overdone and there's too many of them and yada, yada. I totally get it. But to see a bowl game where nobody opts out and you're just playing for your team, you're playing for your brothers, and you get another opportunity to play the game of football, like that to me growing up is what this sport has always been about. So that was like super refreshing to witness yesterday.
It's a great point, and make no mistake about it, there was a lot of NFL talent. There's several NFL athletes in that game. So the fact that none of them opted out and they wanted to play for their programs, for the fans, for the coaches, for the students, for the organization as a whole, that's all a very good sign. And hopefully that means continuity, because I think that's one of the big things that we're lacking right now in college football. Like you said, the old days, that was all part of it. That other stuff wasn't really on the table. Now there's not a lot of continuity. So if you can get a coach, get a program, get a staff that is stable, that's very important in the modern day landscape. We're talking to somebody from Ferris State next. They've seen that there with keeping the same coach for so long. The fact that you can hopefully retain your coach, have a guy that wants to be there, which is the way it seems right now with Drinkle. I think that could mean good long-term dividends for the team here.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's going to go through this first offseason. I think is going to be tough. Like, part of the detriment of being good. You look at CMU, that they had the 3 straight losing seasons. They hadn't been to a bowl game since 2021. All of a sudden, a brand new coach comes in. They win 7 games. They have a chance to win 8. They have a chance to still potentially get to the MAC championship at the end of the year. Yes, you got continuity with him, but now here come all the players that are going to say, all right, we've been reached out to and we're going to transfer. All the players that have had success. So that's the other part that, it's such a fine line. You do so much to build these guys up, and you know how it goes with the group of 5. There's some money there, and it depends on the spot, but there's not the money that there is at these Power 4 spots. And you see a player that's making plays. You talk about Ferris, and you see Trinidad Chambliss, and you're going, hey, we should pay that kid. He should come down and play for us and have a chance to win the Heisman and get us in the playoff. Well, that's a D2 kid. It's the same type of thing in the MAC. Anybody that's making plays is fair game. And, again, a lot of this, unfortunately, is ugly, where there's back channeling and agents are talking in the middle of the season. And then, these coaches get done with bowl games or whatever the end point of their season is. And they're going into these meetings going, okay, I'm hoping we have this guy, but I'm not sure. And then you find out and you have to rebuild it and do it over and over again. That's just kind of the life of a college football coach right now. It's difficult, and I understand it from their perspectives. But that's the weird thing of, usually you get excited when you have this great year, but then you're like, uh-oh, okay, we had a great year. How many of these guys are going to be not with the roster next year, and how different is the roster going to be from this season to last year? Not just of graduation and stuff like that, but just in terms of hey, we're going to lose a bunch of guys, or we may lose a few individuals because of other teams coming in saying, we want that guy.
You can be a victim of your own success for sure, especially in modern day college football. But hopefully the fact that the guys did want to play for this program, hopefully he'll be able to retain more than the average, and we'll see what happens there. But the future still looks bright for the program as a whole. But one question I want to ask you before we get you out of here is, I became familiar with your name, as I said in the intro, because you covered a Tigers game that featured a couple of Central Michigan alumni. I saw your picture there with Enns and McKinstry, and we talked to a lot of play-by-play guys on one of my shows, a lot of minor league baseball play-by-play guys specifically. We've had Greg Gagne on there, and Zach Zerdenik, and a bunch of different guys. And it's always interesting to me because you guys wear so many hats. We're talking football, but you were mentioning that you were at the basketball games. That there's a lot asked of the play-by-play guys, but I wanted to talk to you about your experience doing your first major league game there, especially with some Central Michigan guys on the field.
Yeah, that was, a top 3 day in my life. I have an extreme passion for sports, but I absolutely love baseball. And it's hilarious because I grew up like a college basketball and college football fan, but ever since I'll say, gotten older, matured, become wiser, I've fallen in love with the game of baseball. And I think sometimes it maybe is a little bit harder to love college sports right now with just all the wildness that's going on. But baseball, man, it's there every day, all in the summer, every single day. You're going to the ballpark and you're calling games. So, yeah, that was a crazy situation. I call Lugnuts Baseball with Jesse Goldberg Strassler, and we're an A's affiliate, and we try and go down to the ballpark at Comerica if there's a chance whenever the A's are in town, just because we don't get to connect with a lot of the media personnel that we know out there, and we don't get to connect with a lot of the former players. I mean, you think of that A's roster right now, like Tyler Soderstrom just got signed to a mega 7 or 8 year deal on Christmas. He was a Lugnut a few years ago, hitting a walk-off on July 4th. 10 to 12 guys at some point on that roster last year that contributed were former Lugnuts. So that's the great thing about being an A's affiliate. They've struggled, but they've had to insert the youth quicker. So they're in Lansing, and then 2-3 years later, if they're great, they're up playing Major League Baseball. So we went down to Comerica and chopped it up and said hello to everybody, and it happened that the director of broadcasting with the A's said, "Oh, you and Jesse are here? Well, let's get you on the air." 45 minutes before the game got underway, and I'm just like, "What? We're gonna do a Major League Baseball game?" So just incredible by the A's, without knowing any of that was going to happen. The fact that I called Zach McKinstry and Dietrich N's games when my uncle was the head coach at Central Michigan, when I was a student there, I called their games and got a chance to catch up with them before the game. I mean, they're pitching, Dietrich N's is pitching to Max Schumann when I'm on play-by-play, a Central Michigan Chippewas pitching to an Eastern Michigan Eagle, and a Central Michigan alum is calling it on A's radio at the park. I grew up going to the games with my dad, who's now passed away. Like, I could not believe all of the full circle moments that came about. And, that the director of broadcasting for the A's has no idea about any of this, but I'm just like, this is one of the greatest days of my life. Just all of the work, as you mentioned, that we put in to just become great at this and do as much as possible to hopefully be recognized by people that say, hey, I really like the way that you call a game. I want you to do that for me. To have someone, and I know this is kind of happenstance, but to have someone say, yeah, we're going to throw you on the air and give you a couple innings, and 4 pitches into my play-by-play, Spencer Torkelson hits a home run. It's just like, I couldn't believe all of that. It was an incredible, incredible day.
I didn't realize until after the fact, until I was doing the research for the interview today, that was the story, that they actually asked you impromptu. So cheers to you for being able to do that. I know you're always ready and you do all these games, but that's impressive too, to do it on the fly like that as well, because that's a different level with different players. You don't necessarily know the rosters quite as well. So that's impressive that you were able to do that. I'm glad you told that story because it's a cool story. And I like to highlight the play-by-play folks, because oftentimes you go kind of anonymous there in the booth, but you provide a lot for the listener in these various games. So hopefully you'll get the opportunity again, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to you again here on the show, but want to make sure to give you a chance to plug the future games or social media, where to find you, what have you, because yeah, you're on the rise here and people need to know where to follow you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. If you're interested in a lot of Central Michigan content, and I know I'm speaking to the west side of the state, so I know that's maybe not as exciting for everybody, and congratulations to the Broncos on a MAC championship. It was very difficult for me to watch. But you can find me at Adam Jaksa on Twitter, on Instagram, and I just got a TikTok within the last 4 months. So a lot of ridiculous booth things. I think the most recent thing we put out, we played Olivet in men's basketball, and I had my coworkers, I went around the office the day of the game, and I had them give me 5 words that I needed to work into the broadcast. So I just put that video up recently. But those are the spots to find me. You're going to get a lot of Chippewa stuff and some Lugnut stuff when we get into the spring, but it's on to basketball season now with football done yesterday.
I love it. Yeah, be sure to follow him. I'm looking forward to watching your TikTok dances too in the studio there. Maybe you'll get into that. But be sure to follow him, Adam Jaksa. He's everywhere. He's Central Michigan, like you said, Lugnuts. Great stuff from him. And we appreciate you being on the show, and hopefully we'll get you on again here soon.
I love it. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Take care. Thanks to Adam Jaksa. Great stuff from him. Cool story about the Tigers there. I'm glad he told that at the end. But as we mentioned in that interview, we're going to switch our attention to Ferris State here. We're going to bring on Rob Bentley, the Associate Athletic Director for Ferris State, and talk about their not even recent success, their dynastic success here over the last few years. So stick with us. You're listening to The Sports Project on Jethro FM. There's a lot of great stuff happening at Ferris State. You guys have to be riding high after the run and the dynasty that's being established there here.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's been an incredible fall, I guess, for our athletic programs, and especially football. Winning a 4th national title in the last 5 years. Still a little bit of a blur, but was an unbelievable ride. 16-0, and our football team became the first team, I think, since Yale University in 1894. So the first team in the modern era of college football to go 16-0, either the Division I or Division II level. So it's just a great season and an unbelievable finish in the national championship game a week ago.
There's probably a lot of things that go into something like this, especially when you're part of the athletic department, and there's a lot of factors. But one of the things that occurred to me with the ever-changing landscape, we were talking about this in our last interview with the Central Michigan University play-by-play guy, how in college athletics, it's hard to get a lot of continuity now with the transfer portal and NIL and coaches leaving. That seems to be a real marker for you guys and a big contributing factor to the dynasty that you've established on the football side is you've had a lot of continuity on that side of the program with the coach staying for so long, Coach Anise, and a lot of the same folks in that building. That's a real measure of success and a real accomplishment, especially in the modern day landscape here.
No, certainly, and it's a new day and age, and we went through it a little bit last spring. We lost 8 guys that went to the FBS level, were called up to the Division I level, including Trinidad Chambliss, our quarterback, who is playing for Ole Miss right now in the college football playoff. And in order to replace those guys, it wasn't that we went out into the transfer portal and brought guys in. Maybe 1 or 2 at a couple key positions, but for the most part, it was guys that were in the program, guys that had kind of spent their time in the program and developed over the course of their careers and, got their opportunity and made the most of it. Quarterback was an example with Wyatt Bauer and Chase Carter, who both took a lot of snaps for us this year. And, those 2 guys played behind Trinidad a year ago and, really learned the system, learned, what it takes to compete at the college level, and both had incredible years. So it's kind of a new day and age. We went through it a little bit, but on the same token, keeping the guys that you have in the program and keeping them engaged is very important. And we were able to do that with a lot of guys at, a lot of key positions.
I know that Coach Anise said, I believe he may have said that it was the toughest offseason for him in his tenure there with all the transfers. But I actually think to a degree that's a compliment to the program, to a degree of how you guys have been able to identify talent and develop it. Obviously, you don't want to lose a guy like Trinidad Chambliss, although I'm sure you guys are still rooting for him with his Mississippi run and obviously won a championship with you guys last year. But it's an accomplishment to say, hey, to look at recruits coming in or guys that maybe want to transfer in or just recruits coming from high school and say, hey, look what we've done with this program. We may be Division II, but look at what we've helped to create, not only with the dynasty run, 4 championships in 5 years, but we're also getting guys that may be on NFL trajectories from a Division II program. So I still think that's a feather in your proverbial cap there.
I think it is. And, what's in this day and age with kids transferring, there's a stat out there that, 70% of the guys or something that go into the transfer portal never end up playing college football again. So, I think it speaks to what, we've been able to achieve here at Ferris State and the culture that Coach Anise has, really developed and built over the course of his tenure, 14 years as the head coach now at Ferris State. And, we've had a lot of great success, a lot of great stories of guys that have went on to the NFL and got their opportunities, after being a Bulldog. Guys like Zach Steeler, who plays for the Miami Dolphins, Tavier Thomas with Minnesota Vikings. And, those guys have, been able to learn at Ferris State, guys that came in as walk-ons and really developed. So I think it speaks to, just how important it is to, kind of stick it out and last through it. And you'll get your opportunity if it's the right place.
I've seen interviews with Sealer. He still talks about his time at Ferris, and he's been a very, in my opinion, underrated player for the Dolphins, primarily in the NFL. And that all started with Ferris State. Now you're probably going to have more NFL athletes added to it with the recent success and the transfer portal and guys moving up and getting to have a bit of a showcase like Chambliss was and some of the other players. But you guys also reloaded well. You talked about the 2 quarterbacks that came in. You've got the Bauer brothers, too. The future looks bright here for Ferris.
No, it certainly does. And it's, based on what we were able to do this past year, we had a lot of young guys see the field, a lot of guys that are kind of waiting their turn. And, I think there's going to be an opportunity to continue this great run and, certainly have another great season coming back next year. We mentioned we lost the 8 guys to the transfer portal. I think 5 of them were on the offensive side of the ball that were starters last year. And, yet our offense comes back this year and scores 844 points, which is the most in the history of Division I or Division II football for a single season. So, it was the most electric offense we had, despite losing those guys. And it was because, guys had really bought into the culture, bought into the system, and took advantage of their opportunities to get on the field and display what they could do.
They showed the fact that there's a lot of that there is that continuity in the program, and you bring up the 8 guys. That was part of the broadcast, I remember too, because a lot of the focus has been on Trinidad, but there was a lot of guys that were key parts of major programs that came from Ferris State. So that's again, I think, a bit of a compliment. So the future looks bright. Hopefully this offseason will be a little bit better too. I know there's going to probably be some movement, as there is in every program in college football nowadays, but hopefully you guys have your feet underneath you a little bit here, and Coach Anise doesn't have another most difficult off season here, because I actually talked to him on this show before the off season last year, and you could kind of sense that to a degree. He had just come off the championship, but he didn't really have a lot of relief. There's not a lot of relief in the modern day college football recruiting cycle. You've got to be on all the time. You don't have much of a break.
No, you don't. There's a lot of people out there that are trying to, steal your guys away and offer them opportunities that maybe aren't exactly true all the time. And, you've got to kind of, wait that out. At the Division II level right now, there's no transfer portal window as there is in Division I. So, it's something that, every Division II program and smaller programs are going through right now is, teams trying to poach their players. And, you hope you develop a system and a culture where guys want to stay and they want to take advantage of their opportunities. And, we had a lot of guys do that this past year, and, we hope that continues.
I think it will. You guys have, like I said, have established a dynasty, which to me, you're talking about going all the way back to Yale, way back in the day. The fact that you're doing it in the modern day is very impressive, because obviously we can't even compare the two landscapes, but there were a lot less programs. The rules were very different. So to do something similar in this modern day landscape is kind of unthinkable. So it's impressive. I know you normally do sports updates for us. We don't want to only focus on the Ferris has a lot of great programs. So are there any other updates for us here on any of the other sports or programs here at Ferris State?
Well, it's good timing with this weekend. It's the Great Lakes Invitational. The GLI is at Van Andel Arena starting tomorrow. So our hockey team will be in that once again and taking on Michigan State tomorrow night at Van Andel, and then the finals and the third place game are on Monday afternoon. So an opportunity for college hockey fans here in West Michigan to see 4 great teams at the Division I level. It'll be Michigan Tech hosting the event, along with Miami of Ohio, and then us and Michigan State. So should be some great college hockey. And then our basketball team, men's basketball team, is hosting Grace Christian coming up on Tuesday night as well. So we're quickly kind of transitioning from football season. I do our play-by-play and get an opportunity to do basketball as well. So back to basketball starting on Tuesday night as we come back from the holiday break.
Man, I'm talking about Coach Anise not having a rest. Did you get any rest during the holiday season here? I bet not, with all the timing of the different sports programs.
Oh, it was a crazy week. We got back on Sunday and traveled to Nebraska for the holiday break and just got back last night. So I haven't had a whole lot of time yet, but we'll see. Hopefully a good weekend coming up.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. It's great to talk Ferris and your success there, and we'll look forward to having you back on the show here when it fits.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, Rob. We'll talk to you soon.
Yep.
Thanks to Rob Bentley. Good to get an update on the Ferris program here. They got a lot of good stuff going. Be sure to check all of those things out, especially the hockey. That'll be a good event here with a lot of the local teams. We're going to keep on football, but we're going to switch to the Lions. I know people aren't as excited about this particular subject right now. I've seen a lot of the social media and a lot of the posting, but we'll try to look to the future and try to keep it as positive as we can here. But we'll have Zack Moran of the Lions Wire on after the break. You're listening to The Sports Project on Jethro FM. You've got substitute teacher vibes here with Ryan Walsh filling in for Steve Project. And probably the guest that's most upset about that is our next one, because I talked to him 2 days ago and he's got to talk to me again now. We've got Zack Moran of the Lions Wire coming on. He was nice enough to come on our show on our Christmas episode. It was not the best game to be talking about, but I still feel like we did a good segment. So now it's not quite 48 hours out from that game. So I'm wondering if you're feeling any better here, and I hope your Christmas finished up well here, Zach.
How you doing, Ryan? Yeah, Christmas finished well, and I think we've all accepted the fact that even though that team's not going to the playoffs, it's a good time to kind of look at things in a wider scope and kind of get an idea of where this team might be headed towards next season.
Well, I have a tendency to zig where other people zag with, I don't know, a lot of different things. I probably have a little different mindset than a lot of people, but that has been apparent to me. Part of doing sports radio now and the appeal of working here and doing this is it is a little bit different format, and I'm seeing a lot of there's always a lot of aggregated opinions with these different things, and I get that people aren't happy as far as expectation versus reality. They expected something bigger out of this team. They were 15-2 last year under difficult circumstances, and now they're maybe going to be 8-9 by the end of the season, and they're 8-8 right now, probably pending a loss with the last game. They're going to be heavily favored to lose in the last game, but we were talking about this on Thursday, how it's not the same old Lions. I'm seeing a lot of that, and it makes me think, no, it's the same old fans. The fans have this same opinion, but they do have a good infrastructure, and although there will need to be changes in the offseason, and I think we'll both be able to admit that and discuss that, it's not the same. So to be lamenting this 8-9 team under the circumstances of this year seems a little dramatic to me. I don't know how you feel about that, though.
Oh, I think everyone's ready to. Almost some of the aggregates were waiting for this to happen and just scream, same old. This is what they do. This is what they're gonna always do. They're gonna fall in their old ways. But nothing in the previous years has this team shown that they. Under this leadership, shown that they can't rebound from this, and the pieces are there. The higher leadership is still there, and nothing would stray me other ways of Holmes and Campbell pointing this ship back in the right direction. I think things didn't go their way as they anticipated, and anyone who's crying wolf like that, I think needs to jump off that bandwagon in hopes that they're failing, and just get in the right direction and go with the flow with the team and the direction they're heading towards.
Exactly. I mean, you have people calling for Holmes and Campbell to be fired. It's like, who would you replace them with? They've done a good job turning this team around. I think there's probably some obvious moves. I like to try to explain things versus trying to assess blame, because I think there's some obvious things. We talked about some of them on Thursday, but the fact that Campbell had to then thrust himself, which was probably the right call. Ultimately, he was trying to save the season. He thrust himself into the offensive coordinator role, calling the plays during the game. He's only got so much bandwidth. He's got to be the leader of that entire team, and he's reducing that bandwidth by calling the plays. So whether it's getting Morton up to speed, or it's keeping Morton on the staff, or removing him and putting in a play caller, I think that's an obvious change. Part of it is, I know this was the thing last year and people are getting a little tired of it, but part of it is just getting healthy too. There weren't maybe the same level of injuries of last year, but also I don't think we talked about it the same way, because it was almost like, well, hey, we were 15-2 with all these defensive injuries last year. We had less defensive injuries, yes, but you lost 3/4 of your starting secondary. You lost your tight end that was trending towards an all-pro level season, and you lost your center at the beginning of the season with a small amount of time to replace him. You basically you weren't able to have a free agency period or a draft period to replace him, so you had to do that with the existing assets. That if you think of Ragnow in the mix with what they had, man, this offensive line could have been pretty strong. That's a huge change, because that offensive line caving in the middle was one of the big problems, and it was affecting Goff, and it affects every team. There's not really a quarterback in the league that deals with pressure up the middle super well, because that's the key to defending against the pass and the run, for that matter. But the fact that you lose Ragnow and then have to reallocate those pieces, just adding in Ragnow, a healthy Laporta, and maybe a secondary member or two, and things might have played out differently. Maybe Morton survives that and is able to call the plays, and you don't have to shuffle Campbell over. It's hard to deal with the butterfly effect. That's what I tried to remind people, is like one thing happens and then two other things happen and then five other things happen. So to go back and say this one move would have changed everything, you can never do that. But it's the idea that there were a lot of things that happened that led to this conclusion, and they're explainable and they're fixable.
And I think that's a perfect way of putting it. They know what went wrong and they know what they need to do, and the timing of things just did not go way everyone hoped. And I mean, don't forget, we started 4-1 to start the season. Everything was looking, Super Bowl or bust. But then one thing led to another thing led to another, and before you know it, that quicksand effect just sucked the team down to a point where they couldn't breathe anymore, and they were just grasping it any way possible. And you're hoping that some of these things could be. I think they're going to need to be very aggressive towards free agency and going after some of the top guys, but especially in the offensive line. They need a veteran presence up there with Mahogany and Ratledge on the other end. We're not sure what Decker's future is going to be like. He's getting up in that age where now you got to start to really think the future of left tackle. Do you put Sewell? Do you move Sewell over there, or is Manu the answer? We don't know. Manu got hurt as well, so we really didn't get to see the full aspect of what he could bring this season. And I think some of the guys that they were relying on to supplement the depth on this, and I think that's what happened. You get the starters hurt, and then that depth starting to get hurt, and you're like, signing someone off the couch, and like, okay, come play in the NFL again. Well, this seems like a repeat of last season, and not something that we really anticipated for. We thought they shored up the secondary depth and the corner department, which they did. Rock Sin played well. Meek didn't have the season like he did last year, so that had to pay dividends. And I think DJ Reed was still hindered by his injury early in the season. And there are ways to supplement through the injuries and everything, but when you're constantly trying to revamp the positions around everyone and having players play like they play, like no one plays like Kirby, no one plays like Branch, no one plays like Ragnow, no one plays like Kevin Zeitler from last year. So I think that's what Campbell really needs to look at, is that even though he's slotting in these guys, he's got to realize that these are not those players, and there's only so much they can do athletically, especially coming off of some injuries and other dependencies, that maybe he needs to hard tool that offensive scheme or the defensive scheme and see if they can branch off of that.
no pun intended with Branch, but
Yeah.
but there is a tipping point for all of this stuff. We're going to take a break, but I want to talk about that tipping point, and I think you highlighted some of the losses well. And it's hard with football because it's 11-man units, and it's hard to see because they can replace one guy, although he might be very valuable. But eventually, you do have a tipping point with losing talent and attrition through injuries and free agency and retirement, whatever it may be. So I think identifying some of that and then trying to see what to do going forward, it would be interesting. So we'll talk about that in the next segment here with Zack Moran of Lions Wire. Stick with us. You're listening to the Sports Project on Jethro FM.
From the Scully Statewide Moving Studios.
Country with a Twist, Jethro FM, 1530 AM, WYGR, Wyoming, Grand Rapids, 94.9 FM, Grand Rapids, 99.5 FM, Lowell, and Jethro South, 980 AM, WAKV Otsego, Plainwell, 98.9 FM, Otsego, and 105.1 FM, Kalamazoo. Available worldwide at jethro.fm.
I'm back here with Zack Moran, having a good conversation with him of the Lions Wire here, talking about the Lions and the fact that I think that because it's so easy, Zack, to try to just say, okay, well, this season didn't go according to plan. Let's do something harsh. Let's fire the general manager. Let's fire the coach. That to me is too simple. It's an easy out as far as a mental solution. I like to exercise our brains a little bit like we're doing and talk about, hey, we talked about some of the origins of it in the first segment of, hey, I think it was a great point with the whole Zeitler thing, because that was one name that hasn't been mentioned hardly at all, except around the trade deadline. I saw it a little bit because there was a possibility to bring him back from Tennessee, but even just adding him into the mix, I think would have made a huge difference. But when you headed into the offseason, you thought you were going to retain Ragnow and Zeitler. I was under that impression. I don't know about you, but I was under that impression, and it didn't end up going that direction. But you put those two guys in the offensive line, you still add maybe a lot of the same pieces. You have Mahogany, you have Ratledge in the mix. Now you've got depth to account for some of the things that you're talking about, because Decker is a big part of this discussion with the offensive line. I know it's been focused on the interior, but Decker has been playing hurt. He's now inherited the Ragnow thing to me, because we used to have a segment on my show with Dr. Liao, and we called it into the Honolulu Blue tent with Jimmy Liao. The other name that I was workshopping was something with Frank Ragnow, because he was always hurt, but he was playing through it. That's now Decker, and he missed some games as a result. I think that affected his play, and you don't have the same stabilizing pieces. You don't have the three pieces that then stabilize those two guards where you're able to say, hey, we can have a Jonah Jackson in between these two guys, or a Mahogany, because we have Decker and Ragnow and Sewell as kind of the bookends and the in-between. Now you've got to reinforce and have stronger guys at those positions, because you lost Ragnow. The Decker is on his way out, as you indicated, so you got to reinforce the whole unit.
Oh, for sure. You know, when you're, I think some people don't realize how much chemistry and unification goes into that line. And when you got strong veteran presence, like the previous year, that it was everything you could hope for. It was everything, the protection, the run blocking, everything was there. But then when you remove Zeitler, and I know he wanted to be closer to home in Tennessee, which I think that was his ultimate decision, especially coming close to the end of his career. And then Ragnow's decision happening so late in the offseason, there was really nothing they could do besides supplement in-house. It was right from get-go, before the season even started, it was already an uphill battle trying to piece an offensive line together, which you don't want to be doing to start a training camp. You want to go in knowing these are the five guys that are going to protect Goff. These are the five guys who are going to run block for Gibbs and Monty. But it was, and I commend them for what they're doing. But Glasgow's not the guy that should be playing center. I know Ratledge being drafted, he had to be ecstatic. He's like, I'm gonna be right next to Ragnow and Sewell. And then that's the thing, you can uplift the entire offensive line to a point that you can hide those inefficiencies with all pro players. And it wasn't the case this year. And the Mahogany getting hurt threw in a wrench in the plans, and you could definitely tell he was not back to 100% coming off his injury, and it just spelled disaster. And you could tell this team is built from the lineup, and if that line's not working, it's not going to go very well. You could definitely see it from the last few weeks. Things were not clicking. Things were not executed properly. Missing assignments. And I think that has to go with some of the scheme too. Is like one play really stood out to me. It was in the Steelers game, and it was either Mahogany's first or second game back. And they're having him pulled to the opposite end to block. I think it was Jack Sawyer. And I'm like, why are you having him do that when you got Sewell right there? Tell Sewell to block the guy right in front of him. And I'm just like, so I think at some points too, scheme really didn't help the players as well. So I'm hoping with the leadership and the coaches there, and maybe some changes need to be made in that department as well. That it is scheme purposes and play calling definitely needs to be looked at. And I have trust in Campbell to really look at it. He's like, what was I thinking about doing that? Maybe simplify it. And I think that could go a long way, especially with how hard-nosed this team is.
That's one of the reasons that I am hopeful about this team, because nobody believes in accountability more than a Dan Campbell. He takes responsibility for really too much on that team to a degree, because he puts a lot of responsibility on himself, but I get why he does it. He's a leader of that organization. That's good leadership, and that's what you want out of your organization, and that's how you stabilize some of the issues that have happened. But I think he did a good job of kind of outlining, because I want to deem this the Kindle Vildor effect, because I know he wasn't on the team this year, but we dealt with this the last 2 years where people would lament at the end of the season, I can't believe that Kindle Vildor is starting for the Lions. Well, last year he was supposed to be the 5th or 6th corner, and then he ended up at the number 2 corner. This happened with Jerry Jacobs as well and some other guys. This happened, I think, more than ever this year, because I think it's not talked about enough how many times they did have to get people off the street or force people. I mean, they didn't think they were going to be starting guys like Tristan Colon or Egu Khan or having meaningful snaps for Nice. And I mean, there were so many names. I'm just focusing on the offensive line, but you could bring up the whole tight end group with Ricci and Rucci and Ferkser and all of those. You got to be careful with that name, but all of those guys there. And it's nothing against those guys. It's the fact that those guys were not supposed to be slotted into those positions, as you were talking about, that you were supposed to have a lot more reinforcements there. And that's not an issue with planning. I've seen Holmes get blamed for a lot of, he should have reinforced the offensive line better. He should have gotten more defensive ends. Well, okay, Davenport, you can kind of put that on him. He's injury prone, and you can't be too surprised that he got hurt specifically. But they also didn't invest a lot in him. And Levi Arunzawike, he was supposed to be a big part of this line, and then he got hurt in camp and wasn't part of it. And then obviously they didn't have McNeil for a while, so stabilizing that. Muhammad played better than we thought he would. He was one of those pieces from last year. That's one of the positives to take out of this, is we identified Muhammad and some other guys that carried over and had a good year this this year and became a key part of the team. You could see that with a guy like Rock Yassin, who you mentioned, or Avante Maddox, or some of these other guys, where if you can get those guys back as depth pieces and then have a healthy Arnold, a healthy Reed, it's easier to return to that homeostasis, to that steady state that you wanted to be at the beginning of the season, with hopefully spending some money, because that's one thing Holmes has been doing by not spending the money. People don't realize that money will be able to carry over some of it, so he can enable spending it a little bit better, because he's still got to worry about extensions and rising contracts too.
Oh yeah, and Goff's extension is really going to hit hard this coming season. I think guaranteed money of nearly $70 million. So everyone wants to be like, well, go sign this guy. Go sign this guy. Salary cap's a mess. Go trade for this guy. Go get this guy. But I'm like, guys, do you know how this is not Madden? You can't just sign every all-pro player like Max Crosby, Trey Hendrickson in the edge departments, at quarterback. And I don't think anyone realizes every team is looking for offensive line depth. And tackles and guards and any of those guys are premiums. Teams are not just going to trade those away. They need them as much as any other team. So when everyone's screaming to the high heavens, go trade for this guy, go trade for that guy, I'm like, this ain't going to happen. No team's going to get rid of their depth. And unfortunately, we went in the barren cupboards of our depth to piece an offensive line together. I'm like, I don't know what the combination was like last year, but I think we went through several combinations this year, and that's just not going to work. With the chemistry, with how the offense is going to be ran. You need consistent play with it, and I think they were trying to figure it out. Now I'm sure they were trying to find that right combination, but Tristan Colon, Michael Neese, those guys, you don't want them to be playing all the time. Fill in depth positions, a play or two, but nothing like every other game or something to that nature. So they need to the consistency that came with it was just unfortunately not there. But that was just more towards the lack of options versus the play of everyone else.
Exactly. And you make a great point with the Madden thing. I talk about that a lot too. It's not about spending. It's about value. It's about identifying value in the draft, finding an Amon-Ra St. Brown in the third round and some of the other value picks that they've been able to find. But you have to also keep in mind that the value changes for a player over time. They got great value for Goff when they traded for him, because now they always get compared to the Rams. That's where Holmes came from. They obviously traded quarterbacks. They ended up winning a Super Bowl, but the Rams were a team that did this very well. They traded for Stafford. They had their payroll was trending in a very negative way there as they were spending, and it looked like they were kind of going boom or bust, but they got rid of some of those higher contracts. They cycled in values in the draft, and then now they've rebuilt that team with now they have one of the youngest rosters in the league, even though they have one of the oldest quarterbacks in the league. And they've been able to rebuild and find value because they found Puka Nacua late. They've rebuilt that defensive line through the draft. That's what the Lions need to do. We've seen Holmes be able to draft well. I think he should be able to do that and identify some value players. But it's not about spending and trying to trade for Myles Garrett. Yes, he's a great player, but he doesn't fit into the budget or the outlook of this team. It's about identifying value, and that's what Holmes was good at when he was at the Rams. He's found some late round picks that have been good here for the Lions, and I think with the reinforcements they'll be in good shape. But I like that we turned this into a little bit more of a positive here, Zach, because you want to look to the future, but we got to keep in mind that they're 500. They're not exactly 0-16 like the season we referred to with Green Bay that year. So appreciate you joining me again here. Appreciate you spending a lot of time with me lately. I apologize that you had to do that, but be sure to tell people where they can follow you. I know you've been taking a little bit of a hiatus, but the social media, and then hopefully we'll see you back on Lions Wire too.
Absolutely. You can find me at Zack Moran 45 on X. And once I get back in the swing of things and things calm down, I'll be pumping out more content on Lions Wire, which we'll have plenty to talk about, and guesses on what they're going to do and what hopefully they might do, draft, free agency, and hopefully turn next season around. And maybe it's the wake up call they needed in Allen Park.
I think that's the way to look at it, as hopefully this returns their edge a little bit. But there will be a lot to follow. It'll be a busy off season, and there will be a lot more content to be had because there's going to be more player movement than the previous couple off seasons where they tried to maintain the culture and hold steady. So we'll be having you on, I'm sure, on all the shows across our station here. But we appreciate you joining us, and enjoy the rest of the year. And we'll talk to you at some point next year on one of the shows here.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me on the last few days.
No problem. Appreciate it, Zach. Thanks. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye now.
All right. Thanks to Zack Moran. Appreciate him coming on. That was a good conversation. Ended up being different from the one on Christmas, which is good because, you got to take these pieces of information and do something about them. That's the key with this whole thing. Just kind of complaining and saying, "Oh, fire everybody." That's not really a solution to the problem here. But we're going to turn our attention. We're going to get some basketball in here because the Pistons. I talked about this on my shows, but there's a lot of other teams playing well, and the Pistons are one of them. They're at the top of the East. They lost a close game late last night, but we'll bring on Sean Murphy of the From Half Court Pod, and we'll talk some hoops with him. So stick with us. You're listening to the Sports Project on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guest. I have him on my show pretty frequently here. Sean Murphy of the From Half Court Pod. He's a reporter for the Pistons, beat writer, and I'm going to start off in a different place here, Sean. This just popped into my head because I follow you on social media and follow all your coverage. It's great coverage, but I think your most engaged with tweet, it had nothing to do actually with the Pistons, because I was talking about introducing you and we were trying to make sure to find the right Sean Murphy when we were advertising the show for Facebook. And it seems like you do get mixed up with other Sean Murphys. I feel like that happened a little earlier in the year here.
That is correct. So a little bit of a background story. I am actually in a little over a week's time moving to the east side of the state, originally, from, born and raised Grand Rapids area. And I, decided to put out the news on Twitter in a little bit of a cheeky way, because I do reporting and things like that. And when I put out that tweet, I didn't realize that there was a possibility that people from the Atlanta Braves fandom would find that. And the reason why that is a significant factor, as you kind of alluded to, is there is the all-star MLB catcher, Sean Murphy, who plays for the Atlanta Braves. So when people saw that, they thought that I was breaking the news that Sean Murphy was leaving the Braves and going to the Tigers, when in reality, a random basketball reporter from Michigan was just moving closer to the team that he reports for. So I had to put out a follow-up tweet saying I should clarify that I'm not a all-star catcher, but rather a basketball reporter. And it was so funny. It ended up all over the place. I had some friends send it to me on Facebook. It apparently ended up in some NL East Facebook groups. And yeah, that was definitely one of the most unintentionally funny things that's ever happened to me on social media. Just great stuff. If you're listening somehow, Sean Murphy, MLB All-Star, I apologize for any drama I might have caused.
Well, and call us, and we'll have you on with the other Sean Murphy, and we'll do a whole segment about that. That would be funny. Yeah, I loved that because there was one point where you then added on to the tweet, and you were like, "Why is this tweet getting so much action? I don't understand why there's so much engagement with that." And then it started circulating that it had been confused with a catcher. So yeah, I thought that was a great story. It's also a good lead-in too. I didn't even think of this, but I've talked about this. This has got to be interesting to you too, because we talk about the Pistons a lot, and we talk about, how to improve the team. And I remember having you on near the trade deadline last season. We'll probably do that again this season, but that's been a lot of the talk with the Pistons of, even though they're at the top of the East, do they make some moves? But what's funny to me is this social media landscape where the lines are very thin right now with the whole, you were making, your tweet was sincere and authentic and true. It got misconstrued, but there's a lot of social media posting that goes on that it's hard to tell what's true and what's not, what's rumor and what's not, where are these rumors coming from? The sourcing isn't quite the same. And I remember it makes me think of the Anthony Davis to the Pistons trade rumors, because when I first saw that rumor, it was from NBA Centel, which is a known parody account that releases things that seem true. They do a good job. They clearly follow the NBA well, because they do a good job of tweeting things out that seem real and are close to real, but are fictitious. And they say that in the account. They say that it's a parody account. They identify that. Then I heard a report. I read a report from one of the outfits that had picked up that Kendrick Perkins was talking about it on ESPN. And then it's like, okay, did he get this from that tweet? Because that's happened on ESPN and some of the major outfits. I try to make sure that I don't fall victim to this with reporting things on the show, because that happened. There was a famous one on the Lions side where on the Pat McAfee show, Aaron Rodgers picked up a tweet that talked about Goff being 7-0 or something in games in which he threw 4 interceptions, and that was completely fictitious, and it was from a fictitious account, a parody account. But then it then migrated over to Shams, and then he reported it, and that obviously adds to some more legitimacy. And now I'm reading tweets that, no, actually, there hasn't been a lot of contact. It's just funny to see the evolution of this, and your tweet kind of outlines that. But it's got to be hard to navigate this landscape nowadays, because the lines are very gray and thin, and deciding what's real and what's ostensibly the onion is very hard to tell now.
Yeah, it's we could get into a whole deeper conversation. It's kind of like a microcosm of how rampant misinformation is in the modern day, but especially in the sports world, it can hide in a lot of, various ways. Like you said, there's like the NBA Centel. There's the less, flattering names. Like one of my biggest fears is to get duped by Butt Crack Sports or whatever the names of these accounts are. And so, and there's even people who, who essentially cosplay as journalists and, come off as credible, or are essentially like aggregating information off of previously reported things. And as far as this Anthony Davis situation, it's really interesting because, like you said, it's, you have to really pay attention to like where these reports are coming from. And with the Anthony Davis report, like the way it was worded is, team, like league sources expect the Pistons, the Hawks, and the Raptors to be engaged in talks on Anthony Davis. That's not expressly saying that they heard, that those teams were interested. And that same week that report came out, Rich Paul starting his podcast with Max Kellerman. There's a clip that goes, viral where Rich literally in the middle of the pod's like, oh, Shams is calling. Hold on. And he literally is like, oh, it's Shams. I have to pick up. And you look at like the modern landscape of, of journalism, of the way that information's, broadcasted in sports. And you look at kind of, Shams's background. He gets a lot of his sourcing more so from agents and from players, whereas people like Adrian Wojnarowski works a lot with like front offices and league executives. So I think that report from Shams, and again, this is just a theory because, and it kind of feels corroborated by the fact that people like Omari Sankofa come out and said that the Pistons have not expressed interest in Anthony Davis. I think that was from Anthony Davis's camp and from Rich Paul trying to express where Anthony Davis would like to push. Because if you look at the order of those teams, I think that would probably be the order of likelihood Anthony Davis feels like he could win a championship with.
Exactly. I mean, that's a great explanation of the process, especially because this stuff with the agents has been going on forever. They want to try, they manipulate the news cycle where it's still true to a degree. Well, sources say, well, that's a source, but that can be very loose. That's why I always advocate, and we have you on, we've had Omari on, we use a lot of people from the various beats, from the Pistons beat, the Lions beat, Red Wings beat, Tigers beat, whatever it is, because that's very different than having some of these other sources or people that are aggregating information. You guys are in these rooms, in the press conferences, talking directly to the players and the people in the building, and that's very different to get your reporting from that cycle than it is from an aggregated ESPN national TV cycle where they're having to cover 30 teams. They're getting news from different sources that aren't maybe fully vetted, or they're these agents and different reports coming around. It's a lot different to be following the folks from the teams. Kendrick Perkins might be a bigger name than you, although now you're a pretty big name with the whole Braves mix up. But it might be a bigger name, but you're the one to follow for Pistons coverage and Braves coverage.
Yeah, exactly. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, if you're ever like wondering like who are some good sources and like who are people I can trust, like you mentioned, like the beat writers are just phenomenal. Like like we have Omari St. Kofa, who I mentioned. We have Hunter Patterson from The Athletic, Cody Davis with the Detroit News. National people, Vincent Goodwill is as plugged in as anyone with the Pistons. There are some great, there's great reporting out there. It's just knowing how to find it. That's just a big problem in all areas of life right now, but I feel like especially in sports.
Exactly. It's an interesting conversation. It's not where I expected us to start, but it is a valuable conversation to have. I want to talk some Pistons. We'll take a quick break here, but we'll talk about maybe what you would kind of foresee them doing and your thoughts on the season so far, because it's been an interesting season so far with them being at the top, but then in the rumor mill so much with trade and player movement. So we'll come back with Sean Murphy of the From Half Court Pod after the break. You're listening to The Sports Project on Jethro FM. Back to Sean Murphy here for a second segment, talking some Pistons. And Sean, it's interesting to me because you're talking about some of the potential transactions, and that's natural for the rumor mill to go. But it's interesting because this team is at the top of the East. I know they lost last night in a close game on their West Coast swing here against the Jazz, but they've been playing very well this year. But it seems like the narrative around the team is, who are they going to add? They're clearly not good enough as far as what some of the people are saying about them. And so who are they going to add? But it is an interesting conversation between, hey, you've got a lot of depth. Do you consolidate some of those pieces? Do you work that depth out and be able to rotate guys in? Because it's been nice to be able to go to an unsung guy like Javonte Green at the end of the game, or Dennis Jenkins got some more run last night and was able to give them a lift off the bench. Same with Ron Holland. These guys have different, other than like a Cade Cunningham and arguably Jalen Duren, a lot of the other guys are less consistent. So you don't know what you're going to get from them on a given night. So to be able to rotate a piece in is good, but at the same time, you can get too much depth and not have the continuity of the team concept. So I'm curious where you lie. I think you've brought up a good point on social media. You've talked about how there are some issues with the fact that it's almost the opposite from last year. They were getting behind last year and then having to catch up. Now it's the opposite. They get early leads, but they start to cede those leads as it goes later in the game, and maybe that's something you try to shore up through a move or changing the rotation a little bit.
Yeah, so, like the Pistons, as good as they've been, they're definitely not a perfect team. I tweeted this out last night, too, watching, Oklahoma City and Detroit. There's a lot of parallels in the way that they play, kind of like how they're constructed, just like the way that, they succeed on the basketball court. But, like, they also have, like, a very, like, interesting, like, parallel weakness in the sense that the Pistons, when they are, like, when they struggle, is when they're not forcing turnovers, when they're having to play offense in the half court, when things slow down, they're not able to get in the fast break and create those easy opportunities. Those opportunities are what allow guys like Asar Thompson to fly in the open court and get easy opportunities at the cup. It allows guys like Cade Cunningham, who's, established himself as the best playmaker of basketball outside of Nikola Jokic. It allows him to pass the ball and truly, that's when he's at his best. That's when Jalen Duren is able to, really fly and, create opportunities as well. The Pistons are at their best when they're forcing teams to turn the ball over. So when they're the ones that aren't taking care of the basketball, when they're the ones that have to play, within the confines of the half court, that's when that team starts to look extraordinarily human. That's when the lack of 3-point shooting really starts, to become an issue. And, you look at you look at their rankings, they're bottom 3 in 3-point attempts. The good thing is they're not they're still I believe middle of the league as far as 3-point percentage goes. But they just don't take a lot of threes. And that's because they just don't have a lot of 3-point shooters. They have Duncan Robinson, who's played really well for them this season. But otherwise, they don't have a whole lot of guys that they can really rely upon in that regard. They just lost, last week a game to Dallas where they had 30 more shots from the field because they went 6 of 31 from beyond the arc. And so, they are going to have to, in my opinion, make some form of move around the margins to add additional shooting. Even though Boston is, starting to surge and looking good in the East, even though they have Jason Tatum coming back, they're still looking to shed salary this season. So a guy like Sam Hauser, makes a lot of sense. He can really shoot the ball and kind of fits what the Pistons are looking for. Other guys throughout the league as well. If Minnesota, for whatever reason, goes in a different direction, Dante DiVincenzo's, just a phenomenal player. I've always been a big Jose Alvarado guy from New Orleans. Just his energy and intensity would fit. But in my opinion, the biggest thing that the Pistons need is shooting. But if they were to make a bigger swing, they need someone who can help create additional offense in the half court, because otherwise that's what could prevent this team from really reaching their potential this season.
I think that was a great summary of what's going on, because they do have I think the move makes a lot of sense. I'm with you. I'm not necessarily up for the big swing for going for some of these guys that would take a larger amount of assets. Like Trey Murphy's been rumored, Michael Porter Jr. I don't think that's a great schematic fit, although he is a scorer and a rebounder and can create his own offense. I don't know if he fits the culture super well. Markkanen's been rumored a lot, and he was, obviously they just played him last night. I think that would be a large package to have to, of draft picks and players. It'd be nice to trim some of those players that aren't necessarily in the rotation for a guy like a Sam Hauser. I think that's a great fit. He's been mentioned by some of the other folks on my show, because Boston you want to find the trade partners that are wanting to shed salary and players. And if you're the Pistons, you're in the proverbial catbird seat, because you're able to maybe shed a couple players. And I'm going to go off the board for a second with you, Sean. I'm wondering what you think of this. If you could shed a couple players, you're likely, you tweeted this recently, you're likely going to convert Dennis Jenkins to a full-time spot. So you need a spot for him. And then, so you need to clear one for him. You want to add somebody. And I've been talking about this guy all year because I don't want to forget about him. You're the most likely destination if Malik Beasley comes back to the league, and being able to maybe sign him at a minimum deal. If you could clear a couple spots and fill those in with Jenkins and Beasley, and then consolidate some pieces into a shooter, now you're kind of cooking with gas. You've got your same amount of depth, but you've added a decent amount of shooting through those moves.
Yeah, most certainly. But Jake Fisher reported earlier today too that it's becoming widely expected that the Pistons are expected to convert Danis to from a 2-way to a standard contract. So that's pretty much ironclad, happening pretty soon, because he's already approaching the limited games that he can play. And when you look at some of the moves that they can make, I know they picked up Isaac Jones in the middle of the season, just some additional depth when Tobias was down, and they kind of had, some of those injuries in the front court. So, I would be curious to kind of see like what his future on the team is going to look like. With Malik, it's definitely, I think Detroit is the place where, he would go if he becomes available. It seems pretty clear just from his post and the way that he kind of infers about the situation too. It's just the way the NBA, it feels like they don't want to touch anything with the gambling situation with a 10-foot pole right now and make themselves look bad after the, Terry Rozier situation and everything that happened earlier this year. But I definitely think that there is room for the Pistons to be, to get better and to shore some of the weaknesses that they have. It's just, you also don't want to make the move too early because, for a guy like a Jaden Ivey, it's interesting because it's like right now it's like, it's not always super consistent. He's starting to look a little bit better as the games have gone on, but he's still clearly not the same Jaden Ivey as before. But at the same time, you don't want to move off of him until you've gotten a better sample size than like 20, 30 games is what it would be by the time the deadline comes around. So, I think that, for the Pistons, there is opportunity to improve, but there's too many cautionary tales of the team that go and make the leap too early. I think Cleveland's one of those teams that's asking themselves if they went and made the splashy move too early right now.
Exactly. We've talked about that in previous interviews. Houston did the big move in the offseason, and we're kind of on the same page where, you've got to be very strategic about that. And I think I'm not in favor of that at all with Ivy. I know he's one of the rumored pieces in there. I don't necessarily want to give up any of the young pieces right now because I don't think they're at that proper value like you're talking about to trade. Ivy could be an interesting situation because the fact that this year hasn't gone according to plan for him could work out better for the Pistons. Who knows what that's going to mean for an extension? That might lower his contract for the next time. And if you can get him at a cheaper buy-in point, then that could be pretty good there. So I like retaining him, although I'm a big Tobias Harris guy. I think that's kind of one of the more obvious pieces from the standpoint of his contract level and the fact that he's a veteran and you're maybe going to move Thompson down to that 4, that he's one of those pieces. If you can bring in a younger shooter, that probably fits with the timeline a little bit better. Yeah,
he's also an expiring contract too. So just when you talk about like the obvious trade pieces, he's just right there. Marcus Sasser, obviously, like I've kind of been talking about like with the emergence of Danis Jenkins for a while, that Sasser's future in Detroit looks doubtful, especially after the injury from training camp and now coming back. I just don't see a future for Sasser in Detroit, unfortunately. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's moved by the deadline as well. So, there are some guys that you can definitely look at for sure. But, again, it's just you want to make sure you're making the right move because, with a guy like a Tobias Harris, it's like as good as like a Michael Porter Jr. is on the court, it's like, you question, is that going to be a massive culture hit going from, Tobias Harris, who's so incredibly beloved and is seen as a leader, to Porter Jr., who, let's just say, has had some questionable moments over the last few months. Exactly. That's the big thing. The culture is driving them right now, so you need to make a move of a guy that fits into that culture. So it's a great discussion. We'll be following up with you on my show at least to see how this is going, especially around the trade deadline here. But we appreciate you joining the show, and make sure to tell people where they can follow your great coverage here. Always a pleasure, Ryan. Thanks so much for having me on. You can follow me on social media at Sean Halfcourt on X, and then my podcast is From Half Court on YouTube. So be sure to check that out. Yeah, check him out. He's got a lot of great information, and now he'll have even more because he'll be moving to Detroit. Not the Sean Murphy of the Braves. This Sean Murphy is moving to Detroit. So we'll talk. Not Sean Murphy from The Good Doctor either. Like the basketball reporter. It's a classic name, Sean. I guess you can be happy about that. But we appreciate you coming on, and we'll look forward to talking to you down the road here on my show. Great. Thanks for having me, Ryan. All right. Thanks, Sean.
The Sports Project.